Hey guys, what's up? It's Connie. I am back with another video, and today we're going to be answering the age-old question, is it possible to be friends with people who have different political beliefs than you do? I apologize in advance for the sound of my voice. I'm really sick right now. I think this is the end. So if I don't make a video next week, you know that I'm dead. So. I wanted to talk about this because something happened to me this past week. I'm sure most of you are aware by now that Fort McMurray is on fire. If you haven't donated money yet, I suggest that you do. The federal government is matching Red Cross donations. So text Red Cross to 30333. $5 will appear on your phone bill. You can also go to the Edmonton Emergency Relief Center or Edmonton Emergency Relief Services. They are needing donations, they are needing volunteers. Please do your part. But anyway, I posted a status a couple of days ago about how Rachel Notley is not a firebender, and it was meant to be a joke. But one of my relatives who had to evacuate from Fort McMurray, um, he kind of, I think he took it out of context. He got really upset by it, and he said that Notley was an idiot and that it was easy for me to make this joke because I was so cozy in my home. But reading his comment though, um, it was really interesting for me on a sociological level because up until that point, my family who had to evacuate have been really good about providing updates, letting us know how everyone's doing, and we're fine. But it was kind of very absent-minded of me because I forgot that people weren't fine. People are not fine. Two of my relatives' homes have been demolished, and the people who haven't lost their homes are probably going to have a lot of smoke damage. And I simply forgot that people were still being traumatized. And something else that he said was that he was just on edge right now because he lost his home. And so I began reading some of the comments that other people were saying about Rachel Notley. And it became quite apparent to me that people needed something to blame. Natural disasters like wildfires, while they obviously are not caused by human error, well, sometimes they're caused by human error, but not always, we look to politicians for leadership. And when those politicians don't take action that we believe will benefit us, we see it as failure to act for the people. This is obviously relating to action that we can see. We don't know what Rachel Notley has been doing when she's not on camera. For all we know, she could have been vacationing in Hawaii. There's also a photo going around of Stephen Harper during the Slave Lake fires, and it's a photo of him helping lift some things. And I would say the same is true for Stephen Harper. We don't know that he was actually helping. We don't know if that was just a photo op where he lifted something and then went on his merry way. We don't know because we're not there. We also don't know why people develop the political beliefs we do. We have some ideas, but we don't really know. I personally believe that life experience is everything. The events that we're exposed to growing up have the ability to shape how we see the world. And they do, from a very young age. Psychology tells us this. What we experience when we are young will ultimately affect how we see the world, how we see what is just or unjust, and ultimately that can result in who are you going to vote for at the polls. And I watched a TED Talk a couple of nights ago. Her name is Sally, and she is a talking head on Fox News, and she was talking about emotional correctness. So there's political correctness, and then there's emotional correctness. And what Sally meant by emotional correctness was that it's not what we say, but it's how we say it. And I thought this was an interesting point considering this is a woman who makes her livelihood by debating people who have completely opposite viewpoints than her, and also by responding to fan mail that consists mostly of insults that are hurled towards her. She said that, it's quite easy to get into the politics of political discussion because that's obviously what they're about. But it's harder to begin to understand why people feel the way that they do. But ultimately, it's most important because when you can understand why people feel the way that they do, you can begin to speak to them in a way that will make them listen. And ultimately, that's what we want from other people. We want them to listen to us. We want them to understand us. She ended the talk by saying that she received a letter from a person who views Fox News who began by saying, "I don't agree with anything that you say, but I respect you as a person." And for Sally, that meant that no, he didn't agree with her yet, but he was listening. And that was really profound for me because up until then, I had always thought that people who didn't agree with me were simply willfully ignorant, or they were oppressive, or they simply just wanted to watch the world burn. But I started thinking about the conservative relatives that I have who vote for the PCs and who felt that the refugees maybe shouldn't be coming to Canada and who think that Native people are just whiners, which is really funny because we are Native. We're Métis. That's really awkward. And I started thinking about the way that they grew up, and especially in the context of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. If you don't know my family, we're mostly all white. There's a few of us that are a bit darker, but for the most part, we're all white. We're also all Métis, and my grandmother and her siblings grew up in poverty. They actually lost their home to a fire when they were all quite young. So for the people who are having to evacuate Fort McMurray, they're essentially reliving a trauma all over again, which is terrible. But they also grew up in poverty, so they were taught to save money. And they also lived a pretty happy life, though. They knew that they were loved. My great-grandparents took really good care of them. They really loved their families. They really loved their children and their grandchildren. But there was also a lot of shame around their Indigenous identities. And there was also a lot of fear of people who were different. And you fast forward a couple of decades later to the events around 9/11. And while we didn't really have this problem in Canada, the United States media villainized Muslim people, but failed to articulate the difference between Muslims and terrorists. And while we didn't villainize people here, we also failed to articulate the difference between Muslims and terrorists. And as a result, I truly believe that that is particularly why so many people were resistant to Syrian refugees coming to Canada. Because we didn't see them as Muslim people who had their lives endangered and their homes destroyed and their families torn apart. We saw them as these are the people who hurt our neighbors down south. And our government still did not articulate the difference between Muslims and terrorists. They just said ISIS. There's a bias in research called the confirmation bias, where we essentially seek out information that confirms what we believe. So, knowing what Sally had to say about emotional correctness, and knowing that I had spent a good deal of my time trying to correct the beliefs of other people in my life, I felt pretty silly because I realized that people don't believe what they believe for no reason. They believe what they believe because they have lived lives that confirmed that what they believe was right. And another controversial writer, you may know him, his name is Michael Moore. He's made a couple underground films. He wrote a book called Dude, Where's My Country? Um, this book. Very funny read. It was published around the time prior to Bush's re-election, so the election before Obama was elected. And he wrote an entire chapter on how to talk to your conservative brother-in-law. And upon reading it, I was like, this is supposed to be satire. But he makes some really good points. He talks about treating people with respect, which I think for a lot of us is kind of a given, but we often forget to do that. We forget to treat people with respect. He also talks about admitting that our own party leaders have not always made wise decisions. And that is true, because it's very easy for either side to make fun of the opposing party's leadership. But it's hard for us to admit that our political leaders have made mistakes. And I think that's where a lot of us get it wrong. Because when we admit that our political leaders have made mistakes, it means that we have maybe made a mistake in supporting them. And I think that's what is so difficult when I think about talking to people who are conservative. What we may see as common sense, they may think as, well, that's just an isolated incident, or that's a fluke. Because at the end of the day, we don't believe what we believe by accident. We believe what we believe because we think that it's right. And it's something that will benefit everyone. And I will be the first to admit that I realize that not everyone believes what they believe because they don't want to hurt people or they think that it's benefit for everyone. I know all too well that there are people out there who are just hateful. But we can't paint everyone with that brush because we wouldn't want people to do that to us. And in terms of being friends with people who have other political viewpoints besides our own, I think it is possible. I don't know if I mentioned this before, I think I did, but I grew up in a primarily conservative city in Saskatchewan. A lot of my friends voted for Brad Wall, which I'm not very familiar with the Saskatchewan Party, but my impression is that they are very conservative. Not as much as the PCs, but they're kind of there. And a lot of my friends voted for him, and I was really surprised. And then I started thinking about what it was like for me growing up and how devastating it was when Weyerhaeuser shut down their pulp mill. A lot of my friends' parents worked there for many years, and the shutdown happened rather quickly. A lot of my family worked there, and they lost their jobs. A lot of my friends' parents lost their jobs, and it was kind of an exodus. A lot of people just left because there was nothing left for them there. And I think that definitely shaped the political climate of the city after that. People started to tend to vote more conservatively. Because after that pulp mill shut down, crime rates increased. And we weren't exactly known as a nice city to live in before, but we sure as hell weren't known to be a nice place to live after that happened. But despite the fact that my friends and I are obviously voting from very different political places, I don't actively engage in debates with them because we have other things to talk about. My best friend is getting married. I don't talk to her about why she voted for Brad Wall. I talk about how excited I am for her that she's starting this new chapter in my life. And I know there's a lot of people like me who will message me and say, well, you should be questioning them about their beliefs because those beliefs are wrong. And yeah, maybe I do think they're wrong. But if I challenged every single person who felt differently than me, or if I stopped talking to people who had different beliefs than me, I wouldn't have any friends. And that's not necessarily healthy to not have friends. It can actually be pretty isolating. I mean, if a parrot who doesn't have companionship can literally go insane, um, imagine what happens to humans. And actually, that is a fact. Parrots who are routinely ignored and not talked to, they will actually go nuts. Um, my point is, though, is that we don't befriend people because we think that their political beliefs are the same. We befriend people because we see a commonality in them that draws us to them. Because we see something in them that we think, hey, I want that in my life. I know in my own experience, I've had to cut ties with a lot of people who did things that I didn't agree with, and for me, were fundamentally just wrong. Um, and that's been really hard for me because I'm not a person who cuts ties easily. That being said, though, those people had the same political viewpoints as I did. And the question of whether or not it's possible to be friends with people at different political viewpoints shouldn't be a question. It should be more along the lines of, is it possible to be friends with people whose life ideology ultimately is completely different from yours? And the answer is maybe, depending on how they conduct themselves. Because I'm not, at the end of the day, I'm not really concerned about who you are politically. I'm concerned about who you are as a person. And stop. And I guess as a PS to the end of this video, if someone is exhibiting racist or sexist or just like discriminatory beliefs and they don't recognize that, or they do and they just don't care, then maybe I probably wouldn't want to be friends with them. But in my own experience, the people in my life who are conservative are not the ones with that problem. A lot of the time I encounter that problem with people who claim to be liberal and not racist and not sexist, and who actively refuse to acknowledge that they are. So before you start pointing fingers, make sure that your own hands are clean, essentially. So that's it for me. If you have anything you want to add, please feel free to comment or tweet me at Connie Levitsky. If you want to help out with the Fort McMurray effort, the Edmonton Emergency Relief Society is in need of supplies and donations, so make sure that you check out their social media outlets and the news. Keep up with the news because they are generally quite good at telling what people need. If you're not from the Edmonton area, just go on Twitter and search hashtag IAMFAT, or you can Google Fort McMurray fires and your city name, and chances are your community is doing something to help with the effort. If you can't find anything, just Google Red Cross to 30333. It will show up as a $5 surcharge on your phone bill, and you can donate $5 to the relief effort. And the federal government has said that they will match Red Cross donations. So that will translate to a lot of money for people if enough people text that number or send money to the Red Cross. If you are interested in viewing Flirt's Spring 2016 issue, I did a review of it in my last video. You can also check it out online. I will post the link below. And make sure that you like Flirt on Facebook. The video will be posted on there as well as check out my own Facebook page. I will post some links in the description box below. And I hope you guys have a wonderful week. And hopefully I will be alive next week to post a new video. See ya!